Would you consider imposing sanctions as a bipartisan group of senators have proposed?
Well, it depends on what the sanction is. I'll give you an example. They are ordering military equipment. Everybody in the world wanted that order.
If this is proven to be true, there is going to be a response from Congress. It's going to be nearly unanimous. It's going to be swift, and it's going to go pretty far. And that could include arms sales, but it could include a bunch of other things as well.
Well, the stage is set for a possible showdown between the White House and Capitol Hill lawmakers on that topic. This over how the U.S. should deal with Saudi Arabia if the kingdom is responsible for the suspected murder of Saudi dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia is out with a new warning against the U.S. if the kingdom is punished for Khashoggi's disappearance. In a statement today on state-run media, an unnamed Saudi official says, quote, "The kingdom affirms its total rejection of any threats or attempts to undermine it, whether through the threats to impose economic sanctions or the use of political pressure." The kingdom also affirms that if it receives any action, it will respond with greater action, and that the kingdom's economy has an influential and vital role in the global economy. And in a phone call a short time ago, what we're hearing, Saudi King Salman thanked Turkey's president for launching a joint team to investigate the situation, saying no one can undermine Saudi Arabia's strong relationship with Turkey. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg opinion editor and columnist Bobby Ghosh, former White House senior director and former State Department senior advisor under the Obama administration, Nayyera, and former NBC correspondent and Tel Aviv bureau chief Martin Fletcher. Martin is also the author of Promised Land, a novel of Israel. Great to have all three of you. Martin, I'll start with you, my friend here. Veteran journalist from this part of the world that we're talking about. What is it that we know and that we're hearing about Khashoggi, and what is it that we can do, the United States, with the relationship with Saudi Arabia based on that information?
Well, he's a key journalist. He was at the voice that journalists visiting Saudi Arabia went to find out information about the Saudi officials before they met those officials. He was a friend of the royal family, and then he left the country under pressure and became known as a dissident, but a dissident only in the terms of the language of the Saudi government. He was actually a journalist doing his job, and he felt he needed to work on behalf of writing about the truth about what was really happening in his country. A very difficult position, and it put him in great danger. He knew that, and what happened happened. We have to find out the details of it. But if what is suspected is atrocious behavior.
The question, Bobby, is, okay, if this does come to pass, based on what we're hearing so far about what happened to Khashoggi, who has the leverage here? The United States or Saudi Arabia? It appears that it's the United States, given it's the United States.
Overwhelming, the United States has leverage. This talk of the Saudis pulling out of a military deal is a red herring. The Saudi Arabia depends on the United States not just for military hardware, but a guarantee, essentially, of security, of support for the Saudi regime. The president put it rather crudely, I think a week or 10 days ago, when he said that the Saudi king would not survive 2 weeks without American support. That might have been excessive, but the fact is that for decades now, the Saudi regime, the Saudi government, the royal family has depended on American support to survive. The military assistance is not merely restricted to selling planes and other hardware, but there's intelligence sharing, there are joint exercises and efforts. The leverage is unquestionably in America's hands.
This is something that has certainly been said in this administration, Nayyera, and that is, who do you call? So if we're talking about the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, or we talk about those in the White House, in the national security staff, at this moment, if we were to leverage, as the United States I'm talking about, leverage its position, who would be that individual? And do they have the right standing in the world stage to get that done here?
Secretary Pompeo certainly has standing internationally. He's a former CIA director. He has the intel resources that you specifically need to bring to bear in a situation like this. We haven't seen any of those intel resources come to bear, nor have we really seen any broader diplomatic overtures. We actually don't have an ambassador to Saudi Arabia right now or to Turkey. So having those key posts in place would be helpful at this point. Instead, the Trump White House has consolidated power within the White House itself, and specifically for the Middle East with Jared Kushner practitioner. And Jared has shown to be somebody who is able to relate on a very business level. He doesn't have a broader, deeper understanding of how other countries in the Middle East try to manipulate the powers against each other. And unfortunately, he's fallen into the trap of outsourcing foreign policy to Saudi Arabia or to Israel, that they have very different interests than the United States at this point.
Now, who would know about a situation like this? Would it be the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo? Would they know about a situation like this based on at least, I mean, Turkish officials right now saying, you know, they had data. We don't know exactly what that data is, what that information, where it comes from. But wouldn't a Secretary of State know about this then?
Absolutely. A Secretary of State would have his ear to the ground for what is becoming an international crisis, particularly when the United States has traditionally been the standard bearer for freedom of press. We used to be the country that would go to other countries and talk about how you need to defend journalists. That doesn't seem to be the case these days in a Trump White House. Those are signals that the Saudis, and frankly, even the Turks, who have a terrible record with journalists in the last 2 years, that they're picking up on that the United States is no longer going to be the standard bearer for freedom of the press and freedom of information and transparency. So the Secretary of State is not able to bring all of his tools to bear in this situation, and it seems that our intel services haven't been turned on. Perhaps if they had information, it hasn't necessarily gone up to the White House, or the White House doesn't care because again they have bigger personal business interests at stake.
You know, one of the statements that we just got word of here, Martin, was that King Salman was saying that nothing can separate the strong relationship with Turkey, number one. Number two, there is the counterbalance to Iran and Saudi Arabia and its important role here. So do they have more leverage over the United States because of that? That the United States does need a friendly, if you will, of such importance in this space?
That's been the story for many years, for decades actually, that America needs Saudi Arabia in order to help its policy in the Middle East. Actually, Saudi Arabia needs America much more than America needs Saudi Arabia in the fight between Sunni Islam and Shia Islam. So America has much greater leverage than the leaders are showing at the moment. But the fact is that this is, you know, we all know what should happen right now.
Yeah.
There should be some severe sanctions. If what we fear is true, there must be a severe punishment, as President Trump said. But this is a question of morality versus money, isn't it? It's how do you punish Saudi Arabia without losing the business? And that's the challenge that America faces and Europe faces.
And the relationships that we're watching along this very storyline as we watch the White House talk with autocratic leaders around the world is certainly one of the storylines that's coming out of Khashoggi. I want to play something that we just got in, and this is President Trump on 60 Minutes talking about Kim Jong-un.
I want to read you his resume. Okay? He presides over a cruel kingdom of repression, gulags, starvation, reports that he had his half-brother assassinated, slave labor, public executions. This is a guy you love.
I know all these things. I mean, I'm not a baby. I know all these things.
But why do you love that guy?
Look. I get along with him, okay?
But you said love him.
Okay, that's just like a figure of speech.
No, it's like an embrace.
Well, let it be an embrace. Let it be whatever it is to get the job done.
He's a bad guy.
Look, let it be whatever it is. I get along with him really well. I have a good energy with him. I have a good chemistry with him. Look at the horrible threats that were made. No more threats. No more threats.
Bobby, so that's the full interview is going to be airing on CBS 60 Minutes later on today. But that is alluding to Kim Jong-un. We've certainly seen the comments made by President Trump about Vladimir Putin as well. We now have, if this does come to pass, potentially a government killing a journalist. And this is consistent necessarily with the violence that journalists have faced, or the criticism, certainly, of journalists that are challenging governments around the world, including the United States, and the messaging from this president. When we see something like this, how is this part of the story of Khashoggi today?
Well, it adds to the general sense of confusion about where the United States actually stands. So you have President Trump saying what you just showed there, but in that very same interview, I saw a clip earlier today where he says, well, there will be consequences for Saudi Arabia. What will those consequences be? Well, then he prevaricated. There used to be a clear idea of where the United States stood on issues like this one. That clarity is now gone. If you're looking for the glass half full, you can turn to Congress, hardly the place for optimism traditionally, but senators have issued statements criticizing Saudi Arabia, demanding that the president conduct an investigation, insisting, Senator Rand Paul has threatened to bring a vote to stop arms sales to Saudi Arabia. So there is some pushback, at least from Congress. But from the White House, there is a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and that is not useful.
Quickly, Nayyera.
Oh, well, the Congress, even with the Magnitsky Act, if they do activate that, it'll be about 120 days before any sanctions get put in place, whereas the White House and the State Department have the ability to act immediately against a country that, frankly, is more dependent on the United States than we are on them. Saudi Arabia has an economy that is bloated. I think 70% is on the public oil. Half of their able-bodied, intelligent workforce is not allowed to work. Yeah. Oil is becoming increasingly, the United States is not dependent on Saudi oil. So they need us economically more so than we need them when it comes to business deals. And frankly, we have many other opportunities and partners in the Middle East also who can help us in counterterrorism measures. So Donald Trump is really overplaying the hand of we need Saudi, which is a Saudi Arabia that we know from 20 years ago, not the Saudi Arabia we know today.
In 15 seconds, Martin, another journalist potentially killed because of political reasons.
I think this is a moment of truth for the American administration to show leadership against this. Journalists are being killed in so many countries, Mexico, Syria. The idea that a government...
Could be a record year.
Yeah, I mean, ISIS cut off the heads of 3 journalists. The idea that a government from a member of the United Nations could do something very similar, even worse, if it's true, is just outrageous.
Bobby, Ghosh, Nayyera, Huck, and old friend Martin Fletcher, veteran journalist as well. Thank you all three. I appreciate it. Coming up...